Welcome to Canadian Agriculture Unpacked, brought to you by Footprint. As usual, you will see the contact numbers on your screen. If you would like to talk about something that you hear on this show, or if you would like to have us talk about something on this show, or in fact, even if you want to appear on the show personally, please use that contact information. Today I have with me two guests. Wayne Easter, he's been here before. You know his CV by now, including the fact that he was Canada's top cop as Solicitor General under Prime Minister Paul Martin. Then we also have Dennis Laycraft. And Dennis, I don't even want to count the years when you and I first met at an agricultural political meeting of some kind, probably. But suffice it to say, you have worked long and tirelessly for the cattle industry, including making it through several pretty big bumps on the road. And it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much for coming.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here as well, Bob.
So Dennis, before we get, and I know we've got an elephant in the room that we have to talk about later, but before we do that, I would like to talk about a few other things. Could you tell us a little bit about the cattle industry?
Sure. Well, obviously it's my favorite topic. It's the one agriculture commodity, whether you're in Prince Edward Island all the way out to Vancouver Island. Virtually every rural riding will have beef cattle producers in them, and quite often we're the largest source of farm cash receipts. In Canada, for a few years, canola was larger, but thanks to really strong prices, this past really 2 years, we're back in as the largest source of farm cash receipts.
Really?
So we export to, I think it's 57 countries around the world. I don't know what our farm cash receipts will be there, but it'd be somewhere in the range of about $14 billion in 2024. And about 7 billion of that, our farm was derived through export sales, or the revenue. And we have small producers all the way up to large feedlots with 75, 80,000 head in a single operation. So it really, there's your cow-calf producers, your purebred operators. We have what are called backgrounders who will buy calves or will keep calves over until they're larger to go into feedlots. And all of these make up the beef cattle complex, which then goes into our large world-class processing plants that allow us to export as efficiently as we do around the world. And of course, our largest market is here in Canada. And I think everybody's quite familiar with Canada AAA beef, and and the high quality that it brings with every serving.
So how much of your production is consumed in Canada then?
It would be just about 50%.
Oh, okay.
We do export some live animals that go down to the United States, and then we export about $4 billion worth of beef products to the U.S. We'll export about $1 billion worth of beef to Mexico, to Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and increasingly Vietnam, and a number of other customers around the world.
Bob, if I could just add in there, and it's not just the beef producer, whether it's cow-calf feeder or backgrounder, that makes the beef industry so important to the agriculture industry. Beef cattle are a big consumer of grains, corn, etc. in Canada, and around here, when you're in a kind of a hilly area like where I am, beef cattle, whether it's bringing forages off some of that hilly land that you can't grow row crops on, like potatoes or corn, or whether it's pasture and cow-calf operators, cows, you get great utilization, full utilization of your land, because you've got the beef industry there. And in this neck of the woods where I live, uh, manure from beef feedlots is considered like gold because potato producers have realized in the last 10 years that there's nothing better to assist with soil nutrition, put organic matter back in the soil than manure from cattle operations. So it's really the beef industry is the catalyst for so much more. Dennis has certainly outlined the economic impact, but it's that catalyst for so much more.
So tell me, so the beef cattle that are fed out for slaughter, they come from cow-calf operators, right? Or is
Yeah,
there something in between?
there can be. Of course, you need to keep those plants operating, 5 or 6 days a week, 52 weeks of the year. So a lot of our calves are born in the spring, and that'll many of those will go to feedlots in the fall, but there's also some that will go up. We call them grass cattle. They will go into a backgrounder. They'll be raised up to a yearling age, and then those will go into feedlots. And by doing that, it sort of distributes the availability of cattle throughout the entire year. We also import feeder cattle from the U.S. Our feeding industry has been growing, which at the same time as our cow herd has been getting smaller. So it kind of gets back to that important integration we have with the United States. But to add to what Wayne was saying, there the beneficial relationship between cattle production and crop production is in, and most of our producers will be mixed farmers. They'll be producing crops, but when you can build cattle into a crop rotation, the regenerative benefits of that are quite significant. Whenever there's a weather affected crop, and the cattle are the original biodigester, you can take those crops and they'd be weather damaged. Well, they're perfectly good cattle feed, and we turn it into a real high value food that not only is great here in Canada, but helps us feed the world.
You said the prices are pretty good right now, right? I mean, you will know that I used to be in the hog industry, and I tell you, one year we would have over $1 a pound hogs, and then next thing you know, we were down to 30 cents a pound hogs. Have you had some serious fluctuations in your prices?
Right now, that we've got the tightest supply of cattle in Canada in over 40 years, and it's even tighter in the United States. There were some weather-related conditions, drought in particular, but you've had the wildfires and different things that have affected cattle numbers. So that has, at the same time, we've seen growing demand, strong demand in North America, but growing demand in Asia. So when you have growing demand and tighter supplies, we've had quite strong prices for the last couple of years. Whenever we get in a situation where, we have a lot of cattle and around it in comparison to our capacity, then we'll see prices. We experienced that when we had the slowdown in growth. Anytime you back up cattle, that's when we would see our prices fall, and they fell about 25% as a result of that. I wouldn't say we normally see the wild swings that you might see in some other commodities. Ours is largely a North American market. We're pretty well, the U.S., of course, having the largest herd and the largest consumer base, it sets the price, and then we tend to move within so many, the cost of freight, and then how tight we are in capacity. There'll be a price spread associated with that. But right now, the prices are actually record prices. And the next few years look really solid. But of course, we have the dark cloud of tariffs that are in front of us right now. So.
Well, so you have beef cattle and PEI as well, Wayne. I always thought you were potatoes and golf courses.
No, we got everything here in PEI, Bob. No, the the beef industry is pretty substantial here, and we have the only federally inspected slaughter plant east of Montreal for cattle in Borden. Actually, I actually chair the board of the Atlantic Beef Products Incorporated. And so it's a very substantial industry. Potatoes is number one, dairy is number two, and beef would be number three here. But for the plant here in terms of cattle, we purchase cattle in Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI, and quite a number in Quebec as well. So we go a fairly strong range. Yeah, so quite a number of cow-calf operators here, but they're small, and that is one of our worries, is that the cow-calf operators here are fairly small operators. Many of them are getting up there over 60, some are over 70, and we would love to see a plan to kind of regenerate and professionalize the beef industry here with some government programming, because we got to bring younger producers in.
Yeah, and of course, I was just joking. I know there's a lot of other farmers in PEI. It's an island that produces a fair bit. So, Dennis, you mentioned you export at least 50% of your production. Very quick, is that, you said you export a little bit of live cattle?
So about 800,000 head of live cattle.
Okay.
So it's about 20% of our production. A lot of those go into Washington State from Alberta and Saskatchewan down into Hiram, Utah, and increasingly the old Sutherland plant. It's the JBS plant now. In eastern Canada, you see quite a number of cattle, particularly out of Ontario and Quebec, go down there. So it's been a relationship. It's actually kept those plants operating at a viable capacity. We've been told without a regular supply of cattle from Canada, at least one, if maybe two of those plants would be at risk of closing.
That is going to be a challenge. Before we go to our friendly neighbor to the south, I'd like to talk a little bit about the plurilateral trade agreements that Canada signed over the last some 7 years. Let's start with CETA. I know when we were negotiating CETA, there was some hope that we would get, if nothing else, at least a significantly reduced in-quota tariffs. How has that agreement resulted in more access?
We really haven't moved a lot of product there. There's a couple of smaller niche processor producers that are moving product there, but Europe has a different approach to their whole food safety system. And in North America, we use what's called a HACCP-based system. We test for any microbes, and if we ever find a pathogen, E. coli, or would be with cattle, most likely, we're required to report that. There is a certain testing level we have to undertake, and then any product would be sent to a destruction step. And if any got into the system, we have to recall it. In Europe, they treat that as a consumer issue. In other words, you're supposed to cook the product and wash your hands. So they don't, they sometimes suggest they're lowering their standards by allowing our product in. It's actually quite the opposite. We have much higher food safety requirements in our system. And with our system, we use a number of steps during it. We refer to it as food processing aid, but we'll use a product like peroxyacetic acid. That's really a vinegar hydrogen peroxide solution is what it is, but it's also the most commonly used no-rinse disinfectant in the world for food production. It's used primarily a lot for no-rinse bottling of beer in the wine industry. So it's been considered perfectly safe for decades, and it's approved around the world. But in the European system, you go through the Food Safety Authority. If you get them to agree, then they take it to Parliament and they make every food safety decision a politicized decision. So it
Well, we
becomes
should,
really a target for people that want to sort of oppose science-based uh, technologies. And that's something that when you talk about our other agreements like the CPTPP in a minute, that's I call the gold standard. Everyone we're working there is accepting a science-based approach to this. So as you can tell, we're a bit frustrated with CETA and with Europe. It's never really turned out to be the opportunity we hoped it would be.
yeah, I've always gotten so frustrated with these countries that are only too quick to sign a trade agreement, lower tariffs or whatever, and then come up with all kinds of non-tariff trade barriers that have nothing to do with science or precautionary measures that have nothing to do with science. You're certainly right there. So veterinarian equivalency, they have a problem with what? Do we use chlorine or do they use chlorine?
Um, it really wasn't about us. You had um, someone raise the issue about chlorinated chicken from the U.S. I mean, I'd like to find a community in North America and probably Europe that doesn't chlorinate their water.
Yeah.
So you can really, you know, again, it gets back to that politicizing food safety. And the safest water around is water that goes through chlorination um, for many reasons. So the levels that are used in certainly Canada, I'm not as familiar with all of the U.S. poultry industry, but I do know in Canada, I mean that's carefully monitored by Health Canada and plants. There's absolutely no health risks associated with that. In fact, there's health benefits associated with ensuring we've got the safest food supply that we can possibly bring to the
If
market.
just to add to that from the plant perspective, Dennis, the CFIA inspectors, the regulations, etc., that a plant has to follow is quite unbelievable. For anything to get through the system, it would be extremely, extremely unusual. We have must have the safest food supply in the world. It is just, when you look at it, I know management of the plant will complain about it sometimes. They get a card for this or a card for that, which you wonder what in the heck would they get a card for that for? But it is the safety standards that are applied, and consumers should know that we really have a highly regulated and safe system, and we do trade fairly. I just want to agree with Bob on the non-trade non-tariff trade barriers that we faced in Europe. I was there in Parliament when some of these deals were negotiated. We expected there would be better opportunities there, but the Europeans are pretty good at keeping product out for other reasons, and they're usually non-tariff.
Yeah, the whole political issue when it comes to food safety and science-based decisions reminds me of when I was at CFA. I was on a government-appointed committee that was supposed to deal with genetic modification. And when I got there and everybody introduced themselves around the table, there was a couple of people introduced themselves as coming from church groups. And my jaw, by the way, this was your government, Wayne. My jaw
Nothing
just
surprised me.
my jaw just dropped, and I looked around. I said, "So how does this apply to scientific decisions on genetic modification?" But okay, let's go then. You mentioned CPTPP, Dennis, and that's a great trade agreement, I think. And you already mentioned one of the markets that it would be in that would be Vietnam. But I also know you love Japan. How? But I think I read something the other day that there was some sort of a glitch. How has that agreement gone for you guys?
Actually, it's been exceptional for us. And I will say right now, for a little while, we had an advantage in Japan, but the U.S. and Japan negotiated a bilateral. So we're probably at about, a very similar tariff level with the U.S. We continue to see excellent growth there, and they have a high demand for high quality grain fed beef, and of course, their gold standard is Wagyu, which quite often is the highest priced beef in the world. So they demand grain fed product, and we continue to grow. I think we hit $500 million there a few years ago. Right now, with our tighter supplies, and the yen has devalued. So about the only glitch in the Japanese market is their purchasing power has gone down because of the value of the yen, but they still are quite often now our second largest market. And we do have a tariff advantage going into Vietnam, and I'd call it's going to be the growth market for the next 5 to 10 years. And we're seeing regular growth into that market, and we're close. It's outside of the CPTPP, but we have an FTA with Korea. Unfortunately, when we implemented ours, we were 2 years behind the US, so they have an 8% tariff advantage. Well, we'll get to, in 2029, we'll be down to the same level. So we got a few more years unless we can accelerate that. But Korea right now is the largest import customer for grain-fed beef. It's larger than from the United States. It's larger than China and larger than Japan. So that's how much those markets have grown. They're billion-dollar markets, and they're markets you can trust too.
We're not just on that point, Bob. We're not a big supplier into Japan from the PEI plant here, but we have we are shipping a number of containers to Japan now from APPI. But the other thing that Dennis didn't mention, and I'm not sure if it applies to the bigger plants in the country, Dennis, but it opens up a diversification of products that a beef cut that may sell for a low price in the Canadian or American market is in demand in that Asian or Japanese market, and so you can get a better price for what would be a low priced product here out of that market, and it diversifies your ability to make better utilization of your animals in terms of the marketing.
I was in Costco Tokyo a year ago, and they are becoming quite a large retail presence in Japan now. But in their beef counter, they had, it's fresh tongue, but they cut it in a barbecue thickness for them. It was beside fresh, it was barbecue strip loins, and the beef tongue was selling for a higher price than the strip loins were. So, that's one product we gain a lot of value, but our chuck rolls are cut thin, they're frozen and served in sort of a shabu-shabu type. And you see the short plates. That's why short ribs are so expensive in North America right now. Just incredible demand from Asia. So you're absolutely right. It distributes the value more evenly through the carcass as well. And I'd argue it also helps keep the price of steaks and roasts more affordable for Canadians when you can do that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah, that's for sure. So the fact that the U.S. wasn't in CPTPP, that was short-lived because that's right, it slipped my mind that they did a bilateral. But anyway, it's nice to hear that agreement is working well. Let's go briefly to CUSMA. If I remember, CUSMA we didn't gain a lot. Well, I know we gained some in sugar, but we also maybe didn't lose a lot. I know the cattle industry, well, I think all meat industries in Canada wanted to get rid of re-inspection, and we had no success there. Are you kind of ambivalent about what happened in CUSMA?
Well, I think it was the do no harm approach that was kind of a lot of the focus, we have completely free trade in beef cattle and beef products. And other than a few things like the reinspection issues at the border, it's almost a model agreement for us. We have the largest two-way trade in beef cattle and beef products in the world. So, protecting it was our number one goal, and that was accomplished. Now I think it's clear we're going into a renegotiation, not a review, and it's very likely that's going to be moved forward. I think that's one of the goals in some of the threats that are coming at us from south of the border. And I know from our perspective, we're ready to work with that. We have 4 trilateral meetings as a rule each year with our counterparts with the U.S. and Mexico. So we have very regular conversations about how is trade working, where are the things we can improve, and there's going to be strong support from the cattle industries and the beef industries in the 3 countries to
Exactly.
maintain that.
Yeah.
The comparison is the auto industry, and the integration of the auto industry across the 3 countries is really something else. As Dennis said, in the beef industry, it is really free trade, and it's just too bad some of the leadership couldn't understand how integrated the beef industry really is. I mean, some calves come into Canada to be raised in feedlots. Some calves go to the United States to be raised down there. The plants depend on them. I mean, that constant flow creates efficiencies in the system and creates economies. And I sure as heck hope that none of that gets undermined in terms of these discussions, because rural communities and the economies of both our countries, all 3 countries, depend on it.
Well, so we're almost there, but one quick other issue, Ecuador. We just signed an agreement with Ecuador. Is there anything in it for you there, Dennis?
Um, it wasn't high on our priority list, but we're always looking at opportunities. Again, back to the point Wayne made earlier, I remember when we went into an agreement with Peru, and it didn't on the surface appear like it would result in large quantities, but it turned out Peru's one of the highest markets in the world for liver. So we end up selling quite a bit of beef liver there, and there may be some opportunity, but clearly in our mind, the greatest opportunities are actually in the Indo-Pacific region, and that's a region you have to start thinking 10, 15, and 20 years out as the developing economies grow, and as people as the middle income increases. The first thing as people enter into middle income, they have enough disposable income is to improve what they're able to eat, and high quality protein is one of the first things that will increase in sales, and when that happens.
But you also make a very, very, very good point when you said, well, we weren't sure about Peru, but suddenly something really opened up. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize. They say, well, unless there's immediate large volumes of more access, what good is a trade agreement? And yet, once you have the agreement in place, that's when you can really start exploring what markets there might be. The other issue is something that I used to discuss with John Maswell when he was in Ottawa, and that is that we agreed that it doesn't always have to be a volume increase in market access, but when tariffs are reduced, it can be a more profitable market access, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to translate into more volume, but it could just simply translate into more profitable markets.
Yeah, that's a great point. And if you look at our statistics since that period you actually referenced, the 7 years, every year we've had set a new record in export values, total export values. We're we have a smaller herd, so our total production is actually down a little bit, but we continue to see that increase, and that's what's supporting the very strong prices we have right now. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, that helps distribute the value more evenly through the animal as well. So.
Okay, well, then let's move to Mr. Trump. Now, I got to tell you, Dennis, you have a different problem with Trump than Wayne does. Your problem is possible tariffs. Wayne's problem is he's trying to grow potatoes in the Ukraine. So they're a little
That's
different.
right. They
But
are
I
a
know
little
that
different.
I know you've been traveling to Washington, and so give us the lowdown there. I mean, look, we know the guy says whatever he feels like saying whatever time of day it is. Uh, do you think they will? Well, I mean, we don't even have to speculate so much if they will be introduced or not or applied. What would that do to your industry in Canada?
We've done some analysis on that. You get several things happen if there's a wide application of tariffs. It's going to hurt the Canadian economy. Our estimate is a little higher uh, than some others I've seen, where estimated could have an impact of as much as a drop of 4% in our GDP. And of course, as with the threat of it, and we already started to see it quickly on the morning of the 4th, was our dollar will devalue further. So our dollar devaluing, at least in the short term, tends to offset some of the price impact. So when you sort of blend those together, and we'll export some more product to Asia, you're not going to take everything we're selling to the US. You don't move $6 billion more in beef cattle and beef products to Asia. We could certainly expand that, but we'll continue to be exporting some to the US. So it'll fall by, our estimate is about 15% when you add the net effect of the dollar adjusting, which is, it's a huge drop in our market. At the same time, it creates an inflationary effect in the United States. And I mentioned the plants that depend on Canadian cattle. Right now, they've got their tightest feeder cattle supply. In Mexico, they have found the New World screwworm, so they have not been importing feeder cattle all through December and January and early February. They finally got a protocol, but they're importing maybe 10,000 head in a month, compared to they normally bring in 100,000 a month. So effectively, you've got 2 or 3 feedlots that are empty because there isn't any cattle available. So it has this negative effect on both sides of the border, which our study highlights to some degree. The U.S. economy will see their GDP drop by 1% as well. That's just a factor of how much larger. That's without retaliation factored in there. So it's obviously the best solution is to avoid tariffs or make sure they're as short as possible. And the other challenge, we have large inventories that are priced, without tariffs. So that first hit is going to be on the cattle feeding industry, and we need to make sure, if that happens, that there are the right programs in place to help address that risk. And unfortunately, if you look at agri-stability, caps were established all the way back around 2006 that limit coverage at $3 million. Well, these are people that have $250 million worth of inventory. And with a risk like that, it's that has to be addressed if we're continuing to face this risk. But I think, let's look at it and say, I do think there's the opportunity that we can work our way through it. I think there's a different end game in mind. It probably is an earlier renegotiation, and after, I think there are other issues unrelated to our industry, as we keep hearing about, border security, whether it's immigration or whether it's illicit drugs, and of course our NATO spending. We were just hearing again today, that is the one thing every congressman brings up.
That's the NATO issue?
Our spending on defense.
Oh, right. Yes, yes.
That is one thing that I think there's a general feeling in Congress as we meet that they recognize the beneficial trade relationship we have, but that is the one sore point.
Yeah, and they do emphasize. I've been hearing from some of them as well. They do emphasize fentanyl and immigration. But look, we're not even a drop in the bucket in that area. And the thing I always say to my American friends is, look, guys, it's not us who's the product may be coming from Canada or the illegal immigration, although it's very, 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 it's minuscule compared to Mexico. It needs to be done better, but it is the U.S. customs officials, not Canadian officials, who are supposed to be monitoring that. But the federal government has spent, what is it, 1.3, 1.6 million. They're using Black Hawk helicopters. They're putting more forces along there, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there should be a recognition that we have addressed that. But on our NATO spending, they are right in that, and we do have to up our commitment in that area in a quicker time frame than we're doing. I think Bill Blair said it could be done by 2027, 28, rather than 2032, and that is where we've got to push for on NATO, and NATO is becoming all the more important. One point I want to make, though, on especially the agriculture industry in total, Chuck Grassley, Senator Chuck Grassley, he's one of the most senior senators there. He's a good friend of mine, and he has been speaking out. Like what I've found disconcerting is many of the Republican senators and congressional people that I know seem unwilling to challenge Trump on these issues when they know better. And at least Chuck Grassley now has come out in the agriculture issue and said the integration and the importance of the agriculture industry to both countries can't be part of this tariff arrangement.
Well, I found it kind of interesting that Trump is now trying to cut $250 billion off of farm support. And they were interviewing some farmers the other day, and they asked them, who did you vote for in the last election? They said, Trump. And they said, well, would you vote for him again? He said, never again. So, I mean, it's hitting different people for sure. So, Dennis, so the live cattle could be impacted, maybe carcasses, but do you have an out, like some of your other markets, would they be able to absorb some of the markets that you might lose in the U.S.?
There's a certain range of products that, yes, we were talking about that earlier, with your short plates, your short ribs, your brisket. That's one that we would move more to Asia instead of to the States. The States is the highest price market for that. So some of it, but we would still be exporting both live cattle and beef products. We'd reduce the live cattle exports. Tariffs tend to also favor your lower value products. So on a per head basis, they're lower. Feeder cattle aren't as valuable as fed cattle. So the actual tariff per head would be lower on feeder cattle. Some of the product that we sell are trim products, 50 and 65% chemical lean products. That gets blended in and becomes part of the ground beef trade in the U.S. Those are lower value products, so you'd still see those moving. Again, they have a less per head impact, but it still takes value out of the system, and that never benefits anyone. I think we're going to see this increasing support from Canadians when they go to buy products. We've seen that before during BSE. That's what really helped us get through that first incredibly difficult summer, was this just line up for barbecues across the country to support, Canadian farmers and ranchers. So
And that was the point I was going to bring up. I mean, you went through that. I mean, the border was totally closed, right?
it
Back
was.
then for BSE. So that's was even worse than what tariffs might be, correct?
Oh yeah, clearly there is a difference. We will have a functioning marketplace. Well, for a little while there, we didn't even know what cattle were worth. Every market was closed. We were 70% dependent at that point on exports. And we just simply didn't have the processing capacity for the number of cattle that we were producing each week. And we had a short, again, when you aren't processing for 2 or 3 weeks, you start to back up 150,000 head of cattle. So you've already got cattle that need to get to market, and we tended to be backing up more and more cattle. And where we do have an avenue to market cattle, it basically the spread increases by 25% is what happens on the pricing there, as I mentioned earlier, offset somewhat by the currency. But
All right, Wayne, do you have any
But
questions? Go
yeah,
ahead.
just I guess the only thing the only thing I'd mention on this, it's even the talk of tariffs from Trump is creating both short-term and long-term uncertainty that neither one of us really need in the country as a whole, and also in the beef industry. There's going to be supply chain disruptions. There'll be various changing in pricing, and I think initially it'll be Dennis, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it'll be I know we've been talking about it at the plant. How do you price cattle in the initial stage of this tariff taking place, whether you're buying it from producers or you're a producer buying from a cow-calf operator? It just creates so much uncertainty in an industry that is so integrated and it's just so unnecessary. That's where I'm at on it. It will create, and I am really pleased where we've been going the last number of years in terms of opening up other markets for the beef industry, but it's going to be an extreme export challenge if less of our product goes to the United States, whether it's live cattle, calves, or beef products.
Yeah, and our industry is very, very resolute. We've come through a lot, and we seem to always make it. And I couldn't help but think of that the other day when I was looking at WTO notifications. The value of our farm gate, I believe, has grown significantly compared to the U.S. value of the farm gate. So we've done well, even though we've had some problems. Anything else you want to add as we close, guys?
Yeah, there is one thing I'd add, which related to the earlier discussion on the cuts in the United States. Bob, you had mentioned that some farmers there are really been impacted by it. When we were I kind of follow USAID in part, and you may not know this, Dennis, but myself and 3 others, we've been growing potatoes in Ukraine the last 2 years. We may be crazy, there's days I think, but we are. And so when we were over there, I had meetings with USAID and been kind of following them. And this I didn't know until recently, but the cuts in US aid will really impact the agricultural community, not just beef, but the total agricultural community. USAID purchases about $2 billion of agriculture products from American farmers annually. They do, I'll give them real credit on this because this is one of my complaints about our own CEDA, our Canadian International Development Agency. CEDA will buy a food product wherever it's cheaper. they should be buying Canadian, in my view. I've always maintained that. USAID will only buy American product and use that for aid wherever it may be. So that's a serious, serious matter. So some of these cuts, which on the surface look like, well, they'd not affect the agriculture community, many of them do in direct and indirect ways. But we've got tremendous opportunity. I guess my last point would be we've got tremendous opportunity in the beef industry in this country from coast to coast. And hopefully we can seize on that, expand our markets, and that this dispute with the U.S. over tariffs will not come to pass.
Thanks,
I'd
Wayne.
certainly
Dennis.
agree on that optimism. I've never been more excited about the future of our industry, and I will say we still have lots of very good friends and allies in the United States. I know it's becoming more polarizing, but we really have people down there that appreciate the beneficial relationship, and this too will pass. We'll get through this, and hopefully we'll get back to that stability. And again, I think the opportunity that we see growing in Asia is what makes me excited, and why we need to continue to be focused on how we get preferential access to those markets. Because 20 years from now, that'll pay dividends to everybody in our industry.
I want to add one more thing to what Dennis said on some of those markets, especially the Japanese market. It's not just about the product. Quality is certainly number one in their mind, but it's first establishing the trust and the relationship. That's what we found with the chain that we're working for in Japan, and it's what I found as on International Trade Committee as well. You got to build the trust relationship and don't dare break it when you're dealing with some of these Asian communities.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Thanks, Dennis, for that really articulate view of the cattle industry. And Wayne, thanks for your input as well. And for everyone else, remember the next episode will include NDP Member of Parliament Charlie Angus. See you then.